Okay, welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and I'll ask right away for the Democratic Services clerk to go through items 1, 2 and 3 for us.
Thank you, Chairman. Item number 1 is apologies for this meeting. We've received apologies from Councillor Allen, Councillor Andrews and Councillor Bartlett. However, Councillor Bartlett is joining us via Teams virtually for this meeting. We also have apologies from the Chief Executive. Item 2, substitute members. We have Councillor Cox substituting for Councillor Andrews. And item 3 is declarations of interest. Do any councillors have any disclosable pecuniary interests or any other interests on any items on the agenda?
Councillor Earl.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just to declare on agenda item 6, it's mentioned the government's household support fund. I work for Bournemouth Food Bank and we've received funding from that and also have a grant pending. So I think it's best to disclose that. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 4 is the minutes of the last meeting. Has everybody had a chance to look at the minutes of the last meeting? And are there any issues that you can see? Yes, Councillor Debman.
It's not an issue, and I probably should have brought it up earlier, but I noticed that for in many pages it says a councillor commented, and then sometimes it says a committee member. And I think that's quite confusing to any member of the public who reads it, because I don't know. I mean, we know no councillor speak other than committee members. So I would say to Democratic Services, perhaps that ought to be all, you know, one or the other, and then we'd know where we were. That was all, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps you'll note that.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll make that consistent for future minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you content that we sign the minutes? Yep. Okay. Item 5, public issues. There are none.
No public issues, Chairman.
Which brings us to item 6, which is the medium-term financial plan, the MTPF update. And I'd like to introduce the leader of the council, portfolio holder for transformation and finance, and the finance director to present the item. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and good evening, Chair. Congratulations on your appointment. Okay, so we've got 2 papers in front of us this evening. First one is the MTFP, and then that follows on and is very closely linked to the outturn paper for 21-22. You'll see both of these papers are, really very positive in their output. MTFP obviously hugely detailed. I'll just run through, Chair, if I may, a couple of the main things that we've sort of addressed in the paper, and then open up to questions. So Chair, this effectively is the first paper we've had since the budget was put forward in February. So it talks about what's happened then. Quite like the last couple of years, again, a lot has happened since then, not least the severe inflationary environment that we're all in, the cost of living pressures. So this actually, what we've done with this budget is we've done a significant piece of work, both trying to understand what those pressures are likely to be for us, both in this year and in ensuing years. And I really thank the professionalism of our finance team who have done that work at such pace and in such detail. So what that's provided for us, Chair, is a number of assumptions, which effectively we think our cost of living pressures are. That equates to about, I think it's, and Adam Richards will correct me if I'm wrong, about £14 million in this year, in the current financial year, and in £18 million for the next ensuing financial year. But what you can see from the MTFP is we've been able to come up with mitigation measures, both for the £14 million in this year and the £18 million next year, which is a mix of, as I've mentioned before, the outturn paper, so a really incredibly positive financial outturn, which we've been able to split over the 2 years. And then also we put forward in this paper some suggestions for savings. So I'm really proud of the work that officers, the finance team, wider officers and cabinet colleagues have done in maintaining our ambitions, maintaining our priorities, but creating a budget which reflects the cost of living pressure and deals with it. So I think we're one of the authorities in the country who are in a position where we're really positively looking forward. What we now need to do, as I think you'll see by the fact that the financial outturn paper is so positive, we always take a very prudent approach to our budgeting and our financial work, evidenced by the fact we've delivered such a positive outturn. So what we're trying to do is be prudent about this cost of living crisis. So we've included all of the assumptions in full. Now we will need to test very much about how much of that draws down in practice effectively. So we've got a thought process around our exposure, but then what's actually going to be in practice. So that's where we will look to put quite a lot of our work going forward in terms of how we review our management information. Just let me just see, Chair, if there's a couple of other things to bring out. I think, yes, I wanted to mention the flexible use of capital receipts. So we highlighted a number of the potential risks in and around the budget process for February. One of the large ones was at the time of the budget in February, the flexible use of capital receipts hadn't been laid effectively in Parliament. That's now landed, which is very positive, because obviously a significant part of the budget strategy is around how we're effectively wanting to use those flexible use of capital receipts to fund transformation. Chair, there are a number of other updates, throughout the papers are really very detailed, both service updates in terms of performance and more general updates as well. So rather than pick them out individually, I'm very happy to pause there and take questions. Perhaps I could just ask if our Section 151 officer, Adam Richards, would like to add anything further to my introduction, Chair, through you.
Would you?
Chair, if I may, just to confirm, the leader, when he talked about the cost of living and other service pressures in 22-23, he was clearly rounding up, because the actual figure in the report is quoted at 13.3 and clearly he's rounded it to 14 million. And the pressure that we're assuming for 23-24 is 18.7 million pounds, so just shy of the 19 million pounds overall figure. I think the leader outlined the key elements from the report really well. I think the other one, just to highlight that there is a recommendation to council in the report, which is around the council being asked to consider taking up the flexibility that's been included in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill around a second home premium and revisions to the empty homes premium. And that is a recommendation of the report onto full council.
Thank you. Questions from the room? Councillor Cox.
Thank you. I think I definitely live in a parallel universe, I'm afraid. The leader, you spoke about you've always produced a budget which is always prudent. I'd like to ask the CFO, does he consider the budget that was set to be prudent in the light of the Section 25 report that he issued alongside the budget? That's one question I'd like to ask. But I mean, you also talked about the positivity and how you can be positive when we're faced with such crisis. And it's a crisis when you have to sit down on a weekly basis to try and work out how you're going to pay the bills at the end of the day, because that's actually in effect what's happening here. The budget was set in such a risky scenario that and given what's been thrown at us since, and you quite rightly highlighted some of them in terms of the inflation, but the agony is not just inflation, it's fuel, it's wages, it's the cost of living for residents, and it's interest rates. The agony continues, but we started with a budget which had massive risks in it, and the report clearly says that that we've started with massive risks. You've identified the flexible use of resources. You didn't happen to mention that you didn't get everything you wanted, because there are some costs that have been clamped down on in terms of redundancy, which does add to the pressures that you've got. And you know, there's 61 million pounds of transformational funds that you still have to raise. Didn't mention that, and yet we're sitting here in June.
Is there a question?
Oh, there's a question at the end of it. Well, I've already asked the question, but I'm just.
Well, should we give them the chance to answer the
Okay.
question? Okay.
Is this budget? Was the budget prudent? That's the question.
Chair, I think the question was directed as me as the Council's Chief Financial Officer. So if I may, perhaps I can respond, because I think actually what we've got to be careful about is, you know, whether we're looking forward or we're looking backwards. And what we have to remember is that we have a responsibility to always act with prudence. So clearly, when we're looking at the 21-22 outturn, I think, as the leader quite rightly points out, the evidence is that we were overly prudent when it came to the quarterly free forecast, you know, which is evidenced by the better than forecast outturn for that financial year. When we look forward, you know, we've clearly referenced in the budget report for 22-23 a series of significant risks that were used to underpin that budget, and they were assumptions that were tested and strength tested as part of that process to ensure that they were reasonable to do so. And therefore, you know, the report in front of you today, as evidenced in the 22-23 formal budget report, really is focused on where we are with each one of those key assumptions and the risks that were taken as part of that process. And as the leaders quite rightly pointed out, he provided an update where it is known with regards to each one of those risks. And what we'll need to do is continually to monitor those carefully during the course of the year to assess their financial impact. What we've also recognised in the report was that actually there was a risk that wasn't included in that budget, and that was the cost of living, because I think it really came over the hill at us after all the work that went into that budget was undertaken. And what the report evidences that Cabinet have taken a robust, a strong financial management response into ensuring that the impact of that cost of living in both 22-23 is managed, and the extra cost that would fall on 23-24 over and above the pressure that was already in the MTFP is managed. So, you know, I think hopefully in that response, it indicates that the council, through its cabinet, is exercising diligent financial management in trying to regularly review the risk that it took to ensure that they are mitigated and managed moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Adam. I never doubted that we have rigid financial management of the budget and the accounts. That's not under doubt. What is under doubt is the actual the prudence of the budget that was set a few months ago, and the fact that you had to, in your own words, set an alternative or give an alternative to councillors, then that is in itself an indication that it wasn't prudent. But we'll move on from there, because I think there is some good news, and I'm not trying to throw all bad news at you. There is some good news, and clearly last year it's good news that in your inimitable style, I'm talking to the CFO here, that you've put some provisions aside, and that we have come out better than we were expecting to, and that's partly as a result, I'm sure, of COVID. But one of the questions that I'm trying to get to a question. One of the questions that I really have is that a lot of the mitigation measures, which I applaud, because the agony that's been thrown at the council since the last few months because of inflation, of the mitigation measures that you have put in, they're just pushing the problem down the line. A lot of the costs are there for the future. A lot of the mitigation measures they've just been taken from the bottom drawer and lumped on us. They're not recurring. This is just pushing the pressure further and further down the field. And just like a Ponzi scheme, you're pushing the problem further down to the next generation. So you know that's my main criticism of the.
Is there a question at the end of this?
Does he agree, or do both of them agree, that actually this is pushing the problem down the line? That actually a lot of the mitigation measures, while very laudable, are actually just one-offs.
Okay, Mr. Richards, you've got your hand up anyway.
You know, basically just to respond, the mitigation items that have been put forward as part of the 22-23 and 23-24 management of the cost of living crisis costs is a combination of one-off measures, as Councillor Cox quite rightly points out, but also some ongoing issues. So therefore, the severity of the cost of living on an ongoing basis is not to the level it could be without those ongoing mitigations. However, the other thing I'd point out is, as the leader quite rightly pointed out, there's a lot of assumptions in this. There's a huge amount of assumptions with regards to how that cost of living crisis is going to have an ongoing impact on the council. And I think, you know, what we're going to have to do is keep strength testing those assumptions, you know, to ensure that we've got a firm grip on the ongoing impact of those and whether or not they will indeed be ongoing. Because, you know, there are different schools of thought that say, well, actually, some of these costs, you know, might return to what we might perceive as more normal levels over a period of time. There's a judgment as to, you know, what that period of time actually might be. So it's one of those that I think we've made a really good and tremendous start with regards to managing, you know, the current impact that we're looking at over a reasonable period of time. We're going to have to keep it under constant review with regards to what that long-term impact might be. And yes, if it's all ongoing, it will add further pressure into the medium-term financial plan. But you know that is a big, bold assumption, and we're going to need to continue to test it. I'm not sure if Drew would like to add anything to that comment.
If I may, Chair.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely, and I thank Adam Richards for his comments. Yeah, I do have some things to add, if I may, and I'll try to be relatively brief. I think, you know, that you're probably quite where you started off, Councillor Cox, in terms of us, you and I, living in a bit of a parallel universe, or however you put it. If we just compare the facts of what's actually happened in terms of, you know, what have you said since we've been in this position, and what have I said? So this is the second budget I've delivered. The first budget obviously was prudent because it has delivered, you know, a double million, you know, double-digit millions positive outturn. So, you know, absolutely, and what have all Conservative leaders, you know, and people doing finance in this position done before? Delivered balanced or better budgets. So I've got a track record. Everybody who stands before me has a positive track record of delivering balanced or better budgets. Maybe not quite the size and scale of the better that we delivered last year. And what did you say? What have you said? You said halfway through last year that you'd eat your hat if we could balance the budget. And now we've more than balanced it, and we've carried on spending on our priorities. And then what's actually happened is we've had another massive global event in terms of cost of living crisis. Nobody was predicting inflation in anywhere near the scale it is. We've then prudently putting an extra £32 million of costs over the next 2 years, and delivered mitigations of that in 1 quarter. You know, and just to remind what we've done compared to what the Unity Alliance did. Appreciate you hadn't been given the finance brief at that point, but we've done that without cutting and slashing all of our priorities. So it's calm financial management, record of delivery. You know, how that's not prudent, and how that's not a positive record of delivery, I don't know. So, you know, to some extent, I just feel, you know, any financial credibility you brought into this, you're starting to stretch. We keep delivering, and I'm very happy and proud that we are doing. You also talk, you know, using words like it's a Ponzi scheme, pushing things down the road. My view is what your approach was, or your Unity Alliance approach, to sell off all your assets. That's what's effectively pushing the can down the road, and selling the futures of the children that come after us. So, you know, we do live, I believe, in your parallel universe, Councillor Cox.
Councillor Allison wants to speak. I think Councillor.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to talk very briefly about the increase to the council's debt threshold. I think that was a very interesting conversation we just had from the leader there, where he says, you know, we're being very fiscally responsible and we've got a plan for this and we've got all of these strategies to get, you know, to fix all of these holes. I know where the money is coming from. It's coming from the future. It's as simple as that. So the initial proposal, when we first had it in 2021, we had a debt threshold of 457 million, which was 160% of our net revenue expenditure. And it was proposed in the last budget to take that up to 257%, which represents 855 million. And we're now looking from the 31st of March, to increase the debt threshold in the next fiscal year. So 1.334 billion pounds, which represents 387% of our annual expenditure. That's where the money's coming from to fill these holes. It's as simple as that. You're borrowing it from the future. And as a result, taxpayers in the future are going to have to be paying more
do you
interest.
have a question?
Yeah, my question is, does you think that's acceptable for future generations to be paying off the debts of this generation to fill the holes that have been left by mismanagement on a local and a national level by the Conservative Party? Thank you.
Councillor Mellor, do you want to come back?
Yeah, I think I would see Adam Richards raise his hand. That it'd probably be to talk about this point in just to call out very early on, but it's absolutely not true. That we are not able to borrow to fund revenue pressures. So under no point of the have the issues that we faced in terms of COVID or cost of living crisis being funded by debt. Absolutely not. In terms of, and then we also need to talk about, well, what is actually spent on, what is a plan for us to spend on it? It's capital things, it's investments, it's things like housing. So, if we take the inland home schemes in Poole, material amount of money, I won't mention a figure because I believe it's still confidential, but tens of millions of pounds to invest in new housing in Poole. A lot of the headroom we'll be using going forward, and I think the report's quite clearly talking about what it will and won't be spent on, but it's housing, it's regeneration. So I'd ask the council, if you don't want us to spend this money, well, what housing schemes would you want us to not buy? Not build effectively. So I think we need to be really, really clear. It's a narrative you're trying to push there, but we're saying we should invest in our place, we should invest in our assets, and we shouldn't sell our assets. We should buy more assets so future generations have them. Anything we borrow has to be netted off against an income receipt. So this isn't stuff this is stuff that we're buying, things that we'll be paying that debt off and leaving future generations with the benefit of these assets as well. I'm perfectly comfortable with saying, we were massively under-borrowed as a council, as a group of councils before, and it's prudent to move, and it's sensible for us to move and ambitious for us to move to the top of the second quartile. So these aren't outlier figures we're talking about, and we're also talking about moving to the top of what is the current second quartile over the period of the next 5 years. So I just, again, I have a very different, this is politics. This is great. We're saying, let's go and invest in our place. Let's go and build homes. Let's go and invest in regeneration. I presume you're saying, let's not build those homes. That's great. That's a clear choice we can make. But you are clearly wrong if you're saying that the debt is what is effectively in any way being used as part of our mitigation strategy in the medium-term financial plan.
Mr. Richards.
Yeah, just to confirm what the leader has just said there, in the sense that we cannot borrow for revenue purposes. We can only borrow for capital purposes. And as the leader pointed out, those schemes will be schemes of a housing and regeneration nature, backed up by a self-financing business case.
Councillor Earl, I think you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. I think first, just to say very quickly that I think it's really important not to interrupt our question askers and allow our portfolio holders to carry on with their question. So I just want to ask if I can have my say rather than be cut off. Thank you. So I'm not a particularly financial person, but when I have a look at these sort of papers, there are some words which jump out to me. I was really concerned about 2B, which is about a projected funding gap for 23-24 of 28.2 million. The council's plan to address this adjusted net funding gap being to generate significant additional revenue receipts from new commercial models. Now, this new commercial models is mentioned 3 times throughout the document, But I can't actually see any explanation as to what that might be, particularly relating to the revenue receipts. So I don't know if I can get an explanation of what new commercial models might be, because Google wasn't very helpful. Thank you.
Who wants to come back? Yes,
Yeah.
Councillor Mellor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Councillor. That's a really valid question. Effectively, we've got a couple of options in terms of financial strategy, and you'll see what has been done historically. And around austerity, councils have been shrinking effectively and becoming smaller and smaller, and making more and more cuts to service. That is an option, in and around any funding gaps we have going forward. And there was in February. And there is still now a funding gap for the 23-24. It's entirely in context and in keeping with gaps we've gone into years with historically, and is a lot less than the £50 million gap we had at the 1st of October, when this 18, 20 months ago, when this administration came in. So it's of the normal level. It's a manageable level. We're looking at two different ways of doing that. Plan A, we're really clear on, is things like where we can utilise more commercial avenues to fix that and fill that gap. And we've got a gap while we're delivering transformation. So transformation's been delayed by COVID, which has created a gap. Once we get to a transformed authority, as you can see by the end of the 5-year MTFP, largely at balance, after even having £32 million of impact in terms of the cost of living crisis this year. So what we're looking to do is things like, and we've engaged a piece of work with Knight Frank to work through this with us. Different acquisitions we could make which deliver returns to us. You have some choices around whether you would take a return over every year for 40 years, or whether you take more about return up front. We're exploring some of those methods, effectively. But to give you an example, we're in discussions on an economic development basis with a number of local businesses that need to grow and need different sites to grow. If the councils were able to unlock that and become effectively a landlord, for an economic development activity, again, this would be an asset, a bit like how I was trying to answer Councillor Allison's question. We would, hypothetically be borrowing money, but to buy an asset will generate us, money into the future. So that's one example. Economic development, we could do that through housing, PRS schemes, effectively. So what we're trying to do is explore that. What we've done, we're not putting any of that into the budget. We're doing very similar thing that we did in terms of our investment and strategy around beach huts. We're doing that work with partners effectively. When that gets to a position that we've tested it through SIPFA and our external auditor, then we will be able to move that forward into our medium-term financial plan. To this stage, we're not doing that because we need to carry on establishing that over the next probably around about 3 months. So I hope to have more detail of that coming through, but next time we see this paper. So I hope that's helpful in terms of, we've got two strategies. What councils have done for a long time, shrinking. What we want to do is effectively looking at other ways we can invest, economic development benefits, housing benefits, all of these things, but have a discussion about whether we take some of that up front or further down the line. As and when it's ready to be discussed by council, we very much look forward to doing that.
Councillor Earl, I think you want to come back.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you. Do you know, that's actually really helpful. But I think what it just sort of raises further alarm bells. Things like returns up front, for example. I see that as robbing our future generations, my generation, of our assets and our anything we pay in service delivery or in council tax, by realising it now rather than leaving it for future generations to spend on the things that matter for them at that point. And I think the other thing is when it comes to economic development, you're right. There are ways that council should be behaving maybe a little bit more commercially. But again, what I always come back to in my mind is that residents do not see us as a money-making machine. We're there to deliver services and deliver them well, and really serve them. And when when a council starts to behave too much like a business, I think that really worries me, because it ends up that you're putting business matters first rather than residents' matters. And I understand, you know, where the government has shrunk budgets for many years, I can understand why there's that tendency, but I just think it's important to say I'm not happy about it. Anyway, look forward to those plans. Thanks.
Yes, Councillor Mellon.
Thank you very much. And it's really just two things. One, to say that's exactly a high quality discussion, debate, and challenge in over in Scrutiny, and I value the comments made. If I can just come back in terms of them, just to helpfully provide some extra clarification. So we've got a 1 year issue. If you look at the MTFP, it's a £28 million issue next year. What we're saying is we need to transformation is a massive priority of this administration, and I think we all can agree that what that delivers, if we can deliver that, is £50 million a year every year. So in terms of saying you're taking profit or future income early, it's to deliver and invest in and be ambitious about delivering £50 million a year every year going forward. So a much bigger asset than when we're talking about now. The alternative, as we said, is to cut. So agree fundamentally with your point, around what the people expect council to do, be a bit boring and deliver services. Absolutely. But then if you look at what we're doing, we're investing, record levels in new services, cleaner, greener, safer. We're starting to see the impact of that. The extra money we're able to put into the beaches, the 40% extra money we put in 2 years into children's services. Because we're not shrinking services, we're actually investing in them, and we're just finding different financial models to deliver that. So fundamentally agree to your point around let's just deliver services, but what we're doing through this work is delivering more services and better services. So, but it's good challenge, it's a good discussion, and I appreciate the councillors' points.
Does anybody else in the room want to speak before I go to Councillor Bartlett online? Oh, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask something about the council tax rebate, which quite a number of residents have asked questions about? And it looks to me like 50% of our council taxpayers don't pay by direct debit, which is quite a large number there. So I think we need to encourage more to pay by direct debit, because obviously when we're giving this rebate, it's really hard for the people to get the money. And you're saying that you've given them support via libraries because they have to apply online. And if they haven't got a computer, they've got to go to the library to apply for this. Have we got any other means of sending this money to our residents? Because not everybody has a library within a sort of decent sort of time to get to it. I mean, walking or otherwise, and and find it quite difficult to do anything on the computer. So with 50% of our 50,000 council taxpayers, how are we helping them get this money back?
Mr. Richards, I think you want to respond.
Yeah, and just to emphasise the fact, I totally agree with the councillor in the sense that we do need to continue to encourage, as we have done for a considerable period of time, people and residents to pay their council tax by direct debit, because as proven in this scenario, it would have been much easier to make those £150 payments if residents had in bands A to D had been paying by direct debit. Just to emphasise that we are doing incredibly well in paying the £100,000, the £150 to 100,000 council taxpayers, and I think sometimes that's easy to say, but the sheer scale of it is quite significant with regards to the tasks that we've been asked to do on government's behalf. But we were doing and are doing incredibly well. I think the last figures I saw that we'd paid over £15.5 million out in £150 payments. So it was over 70% of all those entitled had already received the £150 payment. So I think that is a tremendous amount of work by the team in ensuring that that £150 out has gone out as swiftly as possible to the people that clearly need that support. We are, as documented through the process, utilising libraries to make those payments, and we are encouraging services to tap into those resources, and where, for example, people are in care homes, to talk to the staff provided to see whether or not they can support them through any of that kind of process. So we are trying as much as we can, but the principal the process is through libraries.
Congratulations. Sounds like a massive job. Does Councillor Cox?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I noticed that what your answers to Councillor Earl in terms of generating more revenue, and one of the bits of debt that you are incurring is £50 million on future places, which you're pouring into that scheme. Given that you've lost £10 million on BDC recently, how do you feel about pouring £50 million of what potentially could end up as junk debt into future places?
Councillor Mellor.
Thank you very much. Sorry to jump in, but effectively, that's a completely inaccurate. Effectively, I'm surprised the councillor who usually goes through the papers in some level of detail hasn't done a better job this time. £50 million is for the Futures Fund. It's completely unconnected to the work of Future Places. Of course, Future Places are welcome to bring forward schemes, and if they've asked, to make any recommendations around the Futures Fund, I'm sure that board will look at it. But again, I'm pretty sure that nothing has come to the Futures Fund board that has emanated from Future Places, so it's completely inaccurate and misleading. What we have done with the Futures Fund is unlock some pots we thought we needed to bounce back better, post COVID. We needed to invest in our area and our place, and we're starting to do that, and the Futures Fund is able to do that. What we've called that is effectively a local LGR dividend. So Futures Fund will cost us 1.3 million or 1.4 million pounds a year when it's out at £50 million, and we're making £50 million a year of savings. So it's a way of actually trying to push the area forward. You talk about losing £10 million on BDC. Again, that's completely factually inaccurate. The provision we've got in the accounts is that we put in the accounts is for £5 million, and that's basically just because, again, we're being highly prudent about how we want to treat that. We are still debating, and doing internal work about what's the right thing to do for the Winter Gardens. But while we're not going ahead with it, we thought it was prudent to provide for the £5 million that we potentially got into that scheme. The council's only a 50% partner in terms of BDC, so that's our potential part of it. What's actually likely to happen is, as and when we have clarity on what scheme we're going to go forward with, then a lot of that work will be relevant, and we may again capitalise some of that work. So completely inaccurate, obviously deliberately misleading, and I just hope I've been able to correct that. Thank you.
Well, I think it's you that needs to correct the £5 million, because the £5 million is for 50%, and therefore there's a loss of £10 million in BDC. And if we're losing £10 million in BDC, what are we going to be losing in Future Places? That's the point I was trying to make.
Yes, Councillor.
Yeah, I was quite clear about that. I said there's £10 million in BDC, which we're 50% of. So I think, again, I think I was being quite clear. We absolutely categorically haven't lost, we haven't lost any money in BDC, but we're making a provision because it's a prudent thing to do while we evaluate what the best thing to do is for that site. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Bartlett's been very patient, so I'd like to let him in if I may. You have a question, I understand.
Thank you, Chair. I've got probably 4 questions. They're more of clarification type questions. The first point is that on page 5, second paragraph on page 5, talks about Appendix B, which are the potential mitigations for the pressures that we're under. I don't think there is a an Appendix B. I think it's probably Appendix A1. I think that's just an error. I think I couldn't find an Appendix B in the report. So the first question is on page 8, on paragraph 11, the last paragraph. It talks about £16 million for the transformation programme that would be required in the current financial year. And I see that the actual expenditure required in that financial year is 26.25 million. And I just wondered, where does that 16 million, how is that calculated? Because there's no explanation for it anywhere. Just says that, that's what the forecast. Yeah, Adam, yeah, thanks.
You're on mute, Adam.
Apologies, school error. Monday. So if I could just maybe come in and deal with those one at a time. First of all, with regards to the first question, there is an Appendix B to this report. If you look at the agenda for today's committee on the ModGov system, because you've got it starts with MTFP, then it lists the report, then Appendix A, B, C, D, and then it goes to the outturn report for 21-22, and then it lists the outturn report, and then Appendix A1, A2, B, C, D to the outturn report. So it is very easy, between two reports to get confused, but there is definitely an Appendix B that provides the May variance analysis, which supports the MTFP update report. So that was the first point. With regards to the second point, in the report, I think, as the councillor quite rightly points out, we have £26.25 million forecast spend on transformation this year. 25.33 of that is revenue and 0.92 is capital. Capital is funded through borrowing, so we can put that one to one side for the purposes of this question. Then with regards to the 25.33, the question then is, so how do we then get to £16 million worth of exposure in this year? And that's a combination of two things. One is that we have a number of ongoing potential capital receipts that have been in the system for quite a considerable period of time that we expect to get that capital receipt during the course of this year. So that comes off the 25.33 as part of that process. And then what we've got is in the 2020 and 21 and 21-22, we actually generated capital receipts in excess of the expenditure in those years. So those capital receipts plus the new capital receipts that we expect to get in this year comes off the 25, which then leaves us the £16 million, which is the figure that is being referenced.
Okay, that's lovely. Could I carry on, please, Chair? Just a couple more.
Yes, please do. Yeah.
Thank you. On page 16, I think it is, the report talks about, I think it's what you can use a borrowing for, and it talks about you can't use borrowing to invest in any commercial for yield activity. And I guess the question I got out of that is, where does that leave the BDC? Because isn't the BDC there not just to provide for housing, etc.? It's obviously inherent in that operation is the need to make profits for the partner, so are the activities of the BDC compatible with the restrictions on borrowing? That's the question. Thanks.
Mr. Richard.
Just to emphasise, with regards to borrowing is wholly available to support housing and regeneration schemes. So as long as we're meeting the government's definition of housing and regeneration, then we are able to utilise borrowing to finance those schemes. And generally, when it comes to the BDC schemes, there's been a mixture, but on occasions, the council's taking the decision that it would like to own the product that's created. And in those circumstances, particularly, I think from memory that they've been housing, then we've undertaken the borrowing to support the council's business case to obtain ownership of the outcome of that product.
Mm-hmm. But clearly there is an element of commercial yield involved for the partner in BDC.
I think that there is, and when it comes to regeneration, for example, you can have almost investment for yield elements to it, as long as they're incidental to the overall scheme. I think what the government are really trying to focus our attention on is to move away from where we might buy business parks, or we might buy specific products of that nature, and actually focusing on those housing regeneration opportunities.
Okay, thank you.
I think Councillor Mellor wanted to come in as well.
Sorry.
Yeah, just really brief. Adam's actually said most of it, obviously he has, but just to really double down and clarify, that point. So it's not a problem for our strategy, because our strategy is very much around just using our borrowing capability to deliver regeneration and housing. It's not to do with trying to buy assets for yield, which some previous authorities probably spent a bit more time exploring. So we are being very relatively basic. We're trying to do it at scale, but we are just trying to effectively invest in things either for housing or regeneration. I think it's really relevant to set that in context when we're talking about increased borrowing limits going forward, and the sort of the fiscal thought process that's gone behind that. And just to say, Adam said it, but yield is fine as long as it's incidental. So we, you can invest in things that ultimately are good, investments for the council, but they've got to be incidental. So, and again, Adam, and I are completely on one page. We're only looking to invest in areas that is housing and regeneration. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, just one more, please, Chair, if I may.
Yes, of course.
Okay, it really relates to the increase in borrowing to 1.334 billion at the end of the MTFP period, and I'm assuming that a lot of that is associated with supporting regeneration, or the need for it. Now, I think the question I've got is, how much dependency is there on third-party finance in addition to that borrowing, in order to provide the sort of regeneration that you're seeking? I imagine this is just one part of it. So sitting on top of that, you've got this huge requirement for third-party finance. Now, at the moment, the evidence appears to be that there is little appetite for third-party financing of the sorts of developments that we're seeing. And I think the Winter Gardens apparently is an example of that, where there is an inability to secure finance at the moment. So I guess the question is, what is the dependency on having to raise third-party finance in order to support the big plan? And how, if it's not forthcoming, what would the overall effect be on the MTFP?
Mr. Richards.
If I can, Chair, just to emphasise that, as we've done before, when we look to extend our borrowing threshold, we have to recognise that, yes, we might decide to do that, but in order to utilise that flexibility, then it will be based on robust business cases that are then brought forward to Cabinet and Council for their approval. So, if the Council is minded to extend its borrowing thresholds, then what you would expect is that if we do want to pursue any individual housing or regeneration schemes, that those schemes will then come forward to probably this committee for scrutiny, and then Cabinet and Council for approval. And as part of those business cases, they will then be making an assessment as to what's the financial structure that's underpinning that. Predominantly in the past, that we've used PWLB borrowing, but there are, as the member points out, alternatives, and they will need to be considered and explored as part of those business cases. I think what the paper does make a commitment to is that we won't undertake any additional borrowing where actually it's looking to the council taxpayer as part of that equation to actually finance that borrowing. It will all be based on robust business cases where it's almost self-funded as part of that business case. And then just to emphasise, one of the points with regards to the utilisation of our current debt threshold, what we have to remember is that at this moment in time, we only have debt of £487 million, not 855 million, but we've made commitments to 855 through things like, as we said, the Futures Fund, the investment in SEND Capital, the Green Futures Fund, and probably most significantly through the council's new building housing acquisition strategy, which is predominantly focused around new housing schemes, like the most significant one that I can think of being Princess Road.
Thank you, Mr. Richards.
Could I just one thought has come to mind, Chair? If I could just quickly, there seemed to be a contradiction in the report, I think, Adam, because what it says is that it says there's a recommendation that no further borrowing that is not self-financing. Now, I think that really just repeats what you've just explained. It has to be self-financing. But how does that fit with the recommendation to increase the treasury level for borrowing? Because, are you saying that we need to do that just to give us the headroom in order to secure this self-financing borrowing?
No.
Well, before you do, can we make that the last question from you at the moment, Councillor Bartlett?
Yes, Chair. Yes, of course.
Thank you.
So just to emphasise that the borrowing thresholds isn't a recommendation of this report. It's a fundamental part of financial strategy. Increasing our borrowing thresholds is actually a matter for the Audit and Governance Committee, and in July they will be presented as part of the Treasury Management Report a proposal in line with the recommendation to Cabinet to extend those thresholds, and from Audit and Governance Committee, if they're minded to support it, it goes on to Council. So it's not formal part of the recommendations of this report. What we recognise in part of our medium-term financial plan is that where we have things like the Futures Fund, the investment in SEND Capital, the Green Futures Fund, which may not be supported by sound financial business case, those costs of those commitments are factored into the medium-term financial plan. However, going forward, what we're saying is because of the position the MTFP is in with regards to its outlook and the pressure within that MTFP, it wouldn't be prudent to add any more pressure into that system at this time. Until we got a very clear line as to what the cost of living's actual ongoing impact would be. So while we're in that period, it's proposed not to add any more of the Futures Fund, SEND Capital Kite schemes where it's a cost of that council tax equation as part of that process for setting our annual budget.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. Councillor Allison.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to carry on from that, and the conversation was really interesting there on the debt threshold. Can I ask, do we have any examples of councils or local authorities that have increased their debt threshold in the past? And if we do, specifically examples of ones that have gone really well and have generated a lot of income, but also more importantly, ones that have gone really badly. And if there are examples of councils who have increased their threshold and that's gone poorly, are we putting in place, mitigations to ensure that what's happened in those local authorities doesn't happen here?
Who'd like to answer that? Yes.
So did you say, would I like to answer that? I'll have a go.
Are you able to?
I'm able to add it. I think on reflection, actually there is some benchmarking provided as part of the appendices. Appendix D provides you with the benchmarking where we compare ourselves with other upper tier local authorities, including metropolitan boroughs. And I think it's fair to say that there's a mix here. There are some local authorities in the past that have borrowed probably for the wrong reasons, and that's why government have taken the learning and put in place, as referred to the report, greater restrictions on actually how that borrowing can be used, i.e. if it's okay if it's focused on housing and regeneration, but if it's focused on some of the other things that some of the other local authorities have used it for in the past, like buying energy companies, for example, then that is something that through their tightening of the regulatory framework, they're really challenging local authorities to consider if that is appropriate to do so, going forward. So it's quite difficult looking backwards, because actually that that regulatory framework should help guide us as to what is reasonable and prudent in the future by way of the application of our borrowing thresholds.
Thank you. I don't want to stifle debate. Is there anybody else? Yes, Councillor Dedman.
Sorry, Chairman, I thought this was questions and then we'd go to debate. Is that not right? Oh, well, anyway, it was a question. And it was a question because very early on in the leader's presentation, he mentioned that there have been a lot of savings made and congratulated the officers. Now, I'm a bit concerned. Is that because we have lost staff and we can't replace staff? And when we replace staff, those savings will go? Can I have an assurance on that it isn't those savings we're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Councillor Dedman. Yeah, so you've got a detailed report, the appendix effectively, which Councillor Richards Adam Richards and Councillor Bartlett were discussing, which talks through any of those effective savings or mitigations that we brought forward to balance the cost of living crisis. There will be some element of that where there are staff vacancies. That's not the material end of it at all. We've put forward mitigations for the next 2 years. This will be a very different authority in 2 years' time, post having worked through the transformation programme in full. Remind people that through that programme, the ambition of that programme is to not just to modernise services, but is also to reduce headcount to be much more efficient in terms of our back office. So there are savings coming, but what we're doing, what our budget process is doing, is despite those core savings, going above and beyond that and investing in our priority areas. So we've got real genuine growth in a lot of the environment service areas, like anything to do with cleaner, greener, safer. That's putting more investment in there. But we have got we've taken some sensible and prudent mitigations, again diligently worked through by senior officers and cabinet portfolio holders. Some of that will be staff savings. Some of that will be the vacancies, but a lot of it is as you can see in the detail of the appendix, other areas. So hopefully that gives some assurance to Councillor Dedman.
Anybody else? Yes, Councillor Cox.
Sorry, just to come back on the debt issue that I fully appreciate, and I'm sure Councillor Arson fully appreciates, that the extra debt will be on housing and regeneration, and not some sort of flimsy scheme like building a lift in Boscombe. But that's still adding to the debt of the council. But we are creating effectively our own junk debt in terms of the beach huts, for instance. That is effectively what you're doing is, I think the terminology you're using is securitization of income. That's effectively a kind of junk debt. And what you're doing is you're taking income from the future generations of people who live in this area, and you're spending it today. Now, I know what your argument is going to be. Is you're going to turn that around and you're going to actually spend it on transformation and create more income in the future. But the fact is, last year you failed to actually to meet your transformational savings targets abysmally, and now you're suddenly expecting that to increase by tenfold. Now, if you do it, then that's great, but history does not bode well.
Mello, do you want to come?
Yeah, you'll be surprised to hear, Chair, but I would like to come back. First of all, I mean, you're a finance professional, and how you could possibly call securitization that automatically means it's junk debt is just unfathomable. I'll work you through it sometime if you want. And I'll just come back to the where you ended as well. If you do it, I'll be the first to congratulate you. But we've sat here, in the same meeting with a slightly different name under it, when you said we'd have to cancel all of our priorities. The chief executive had to intervene and effectively not allow your the amendment you're trying to raise because it would have been deeply damaging. And then we have delivered not just a balanced budget, a much better budget, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So in terms of your integrity around, if you do it, then I'll congratulate you. I call that into question. A couple of other things that I didn't agree with what you said. You said, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to turn it around and deliver through the beach huts and the transformation scheme more income. No, what we're trying to do is to fund the transformation scheme to take cost out of the organisation, to make it a more efficient organisation, not to deliver more income for it. And in terms of transformation, we took a very proactive decision. You know, you'll remember, and again, this wasn't when you were in charge of the Unity Alliance finances, but there was the MTFP, the medium-term financial plan I inherited, was a £15 million cut in 1 year around transformation, which would have been ripping cost out of this organisation before we'd done a transformation programme, before we'd done any of the benefits for it. So what that would have effectively been would have been taking £15 million of staff out of the organisation as your only Hail Mary to try and balance the books. We've realised we didn't need to do that. First of all, we put a 50% haircut in there, so we put £7.5 million into our budget, and now we said because we delivered a massively balanced and significantly better a budget, we didn't actually need to make any of those transformation savings in that year at all, and we didn't do it. So you know, it's clear decision making around doing transformation properly. Let's invest more in it, which is what we're saying we should do. Let's be more ambitious about the outcome, but let's ask the organisation to drive those efficiencies. Let's remove those roles when we've done the work to deliver more efficient organisation for them. And Councillor Allison and I have discussed this at some length, and and historically we will be putting the organisation, restructuring the organisation when we've got the most efficient organisation in the country and all the back office systems there. So again, unsurprisingly, I seem to be disagreeing with you quite a lot this evening, Councillor Cox.
Councillor Deadman.
Well, it's a very, very quick question to the leader that he's gone on talking. And to those of us who are not accountants, and I count myself as one, although I do know how to read a bottom line, for example, what does a haircut mean? You were talking accountancy, leader, and I think you should be a bit more careful.
Thank you very much.
What's the question? What does haircut mean, leader?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. I do apologise if I have been too technical. It certainly wasn't my intention. I was addressing I'm starting to wonder, but a finance professional across the chamber. Haircut effectively means 50. It's a reduction effectively, Councillor Deadman. And apologies if I was unhelpful.
Did you want to come in, Councillor Bartlett? I see you've come back on.
I've not put my hand up, Chair.
No, okay, that's fine. Anybody else? Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask a simple question? It was about the second homes and their paying of the council tax. Are we saying that that some second homes in the three different towns don't all pay the 100% council tax? Because I thought Bournemouth, that second homes always paid the 100% council tax.
Councillor Mellor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. And it's a really valid question. Adam will have more details if we need them. So yes, effective to 100% council tax. An ambition in the levelling up the paper that's just gone through or is going through government at the moment is to allow the councils to charge 200%. For second home owners. So the government is effectively saying it's particularly relevant into areas like ours, Cornwall, and other attractive destinations. Locals are being priced out of the market because of an abundance of second homeowners. So what the government is saying is actually, we need, if somebody is going to be a second homeowner, great, that's fine. But we're going to have effectively a penalty for doing so, and then that money will go into the local authorities to spend. And again, that will support services we'll be delivering, but also it'll support stuff like regeneration and house building, so that we can then prioritise homes for local people. So what I think this will do, it means some second homeowners will realise that they now's not worth it for them. They will come away. And just to reiterate, so this isn't coming into into this year. And Adam, I don't even think it's in next year. It's not in 23-24. It's 24-25, isn't it? Yeah, that's correct. So there is time for second homeowners to understanding that the change is coming. But we believe that we should move when we have the ability to charge 200% to second homeowners. We believe we should do because we're desperate to create affordable homes and homes for local people. So our children and the people who'll be doing the jobs of the future will have places to stay in BCP. Hopefully that answered your question, Councillor Edwards.
Well, not quite, but no, I think that's charging 200% on services they don't actually receive. I think is opening a can of worms here. And to be honest, if we had 100% occupancy of all our homes in the area, I think we would be in serious trouble with doctors, dentists, schools, etc. So I think we need to sort of think about this really carefully when this comes up.
Yeah, absolutely. Very happy to have that debate and discussion as a council chair. I feels to me that it's a strong statement around creating homes for our families effectively rather than second homeowners. But that is absolutely a debate and discussion that should be had as a councillor group. Thank you.
No more questions. I don't know, Councillor Cox.
Oh, it was on that point that Councillor Edwards just raised. I think the principle of is correct in terms of local homes for local people. That's certainly something that I think all can buy into. But penalising people who want to help out the local economy in this way is fraught with difficulty, not least of which is the potential for getting round whatever you decide to set up. I think you've got to tread very carefully on this, and as an administration and as a council, because I think it will be fraught with difficulty. I agree with the principle of local homes for local people. That's absolutely right. But to try and penalise people who want to come here and produce and to help out with our economy is also a difficult sell, in my opinion.
Thank you. I think that probably brings to an end this particular section. We're asked to note this paper. Please consent, we'll note it and move on now to the MTFP and ask Adam if you'd like to. Yes.
I don't actually believe that's what is being recommended. We endorse. It's not just noting. This is endorsing. This is approving financial strategy in respect of paragraph 21, which I particularly don't want to do, and acknowledging cost of living, which is fine.
It's the cabinet that recommend. It's not us.
Oh, is it? All right. Okay. That's
okay. Yes, Councillor Bartlett.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with Councillor Cox there because the recommendation is for cabinet clearly, but if this committee feels that it's something that the cabinet should not be recommending, then this committee should say so. I personally have great unease about the extent to which borrowing is going to be increased, particularly in light of the issues around raising third-party finance for regeneration. But clearly, I'm not in a position to make a move because I'm not in the meeting and I can't vote on it anyway. So, but I did actually have my hand up, Chair, before you decided to move on, and you obviously didn't see that my hand was up.
Sorry.
I had another point that I wanted to raise, and it was about paragraph 28 on page 18, where it says there was a recommendation from the CFO regarding an alternative budget. I do not recall there being a formal recommendation from the CFO at the budget meeting. I do remember very clearly a set of questions that he put to all councillors, asking us to consider very carefully before voting on the budget itself, which I hope we all did. But I do not recall any direct recommendations from the CFO at the time. and I don't believe there was an alternative budget presented to us. But underlying all of that question, does the CFO still hold that there would have been a better way of producing the budget for the current year, as outlined in that budget report? Does he still hold that view?
Mr. Richards.
Just to respond to the question from Councillor Bartlett, in the sense that when it comes to the budget report for 22-23, members and councillors of the council are required to consider the advice of the Chief Financial Officer. In the advice of the Chief Financial Officer, I set out very detailed of the highlighting of the risks that were taken as part of that process. And what I did as part of that is I suggested an alternative. And that's a suggested alternative, because it is not for me to make recommendations for council. But in suggesting an alternative, the assumption then is that if no member then took up that suggestion and put it forward to council, that actually councils, because councillors are required to consider my advice, considered that advice and didn't support that advice in taking it forward and potentially making a recommendation of their own to council. So that was the process that was clearly set out as part of that budget process and that budget report, and clearly no member decided to, if you like, support that advice or that suggestion and make a formal recommendation to council. With regards to whether I still stand by that advice, I still stand by that advice. I still stand by that advice. But what I am doing is working with the administration to carefully, as we said, through this report, monitor those risks with regards to making sure that where they or any risk that we didn't think about, like cost of living, crop up, that we're putting into place mitigation strategies, and therefore working in that proactive way to ensure the council's finances are still in that overall state of control.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you, Chair.
Councillor Dedman.
Yes, I just wanted to come back because I'm a bit surprised at how the meeting's gone. I'm so sorry, Chairman. We didn't normally do it like this at Scrutiny. We've had questions, but we haven't had debate, which I do find odd in a council chamber. But I would have wanted to say, if we had come to debate, that I find it very worrying that the officer has even he's asked us to give serious consideration to not investing, to not committing further borrowing, and proposals to use complex capital transactions as a mechanism need to be treated with a high degree of caution. Now, I still feel that that needs to be said, thus I'm saying it. And I think that at the meeting to which the officer refers, I'm sorry, Mr. Richards, the meeting was going so fast that I don't think opposition councillors had much chance to say what we really felt about it. So I feel that I would like to say that now at this particular meeting, because the other point I have to make is that we do make recommendations to the Cabinet. That's what we're here for. So we can only recommend that the Cabinet recommendation is not what we think. Now, I think that that needs to go to a vote. I'm not telling you your job, Chairman. I wouldn't dream of it. But
you actually.
I actually am I? I'm so
no,
sorry.
No. You're actually right.
Well,
and I was, when you finished, going to ask if anybody had recommendations, but please carry on. Sorry.
When you come to do that, then, Chairman, I would like to add to the recommendations that will be before the Cabinet when they have their meeting, and then our voice will be heard. Thank you, Chairman.
So, Councillor Allison.
I guess, well, it's going to be a recommendation, but I wanted to ask whether or not we thought it was, I wanted to check really with Adam whether or not he thought it was an appropriate recommendation, which is that I don't really think that, I mean, we've got some benchmarking in here, but there's not really anything in terms of increasing the debt threshold. There's not really any information here that I can use to sort of see whether or not, what level of risk that is and what mitigations I've got in place. Is it possible for there to be some kind of document, either a risk register or a list of proposed mitigations, something that we could see that could sort of, help me understand what level of risk we're looking at in terms of raising this debt threshold? Could that be a recommendation for the report?
Yes, Mr. Richards.
Chair, can I just maybe emphasise the point that I emphasised earlier, that actually the increase in the debt threshold is a matter for Audit and Governance Committee. It will be a recommendation on a report that goes to Audit and Governance Committee in July. It isn't a recommendation of the report in front of you today. It's only included today because clearly it is part of the overall financial strategy of the authority. And I just wanted to make that clear distinction. In regards to Councillor Allison's question, it's really difficult to answer what the mitigation is, because actually what will come forward is a series of business cases that look at how each of, how any extension of the overall threshold will potentially be applied. And, what we'll need to consider is the mitigation strategies on each one of those projects as they are brought forward.
We have Councillor Farquhar in the audience. I think you want to speak. I did see you just coming to the table.
Thank you, Chair. I really appreciate the opportunity to perhaps add some value to this this committee meeting, and I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak, perhaps out of turn or out of order. I was extremely interested to hear Mr. Richards talk about an alternative recommendation which he made at full council. The reason that No problem, Chair. The reason I was extremely interested is because there is no small amount of discussion in the medium of the local newspapers as regards this statement by Mr. Richards that in some way council has failed in their duty to offer an alternative or to recognise the recommendations given by the Chief Financial Officer in his role. I would perhaps suggest that this is an opportunity within this committee to explore that recommendation which was given at full council, because it might well colour the recommendation that this committee might well give to cabinet after the actual vote which was at full council for the budget. I, as many others in this room, sat through that particular meeting, sat through the controversial discussions around reports that are created, not created. I read beforehand and myself commented in the form of social media as regards this high degree of risk, and perhaps in my naivety as a new councillor in how the mechanisms work. If the Chief Financial Officer had serious concerns that an alternative should be considered, I don't think they came to the full, nor was it the benefit of those councillors that were in that meeting to consider those and debate them properly based upon the other factors such as the report that did or did not exist, and also this later plan, which is to involving the special purpose vehicle for the beach huts. But I like the opportunity for you to consider as committee chair whether or not there needs to be some debate as regards the recommendation that the Chief Financial Officer says that he gave to full council, and that for some reason or whatever, when the procedures or the running of that particular meeting, that wasn't observed or the implications wasn't accepted by all members of that meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Richards.
Chair, if I may, just to emphasise, I did not make a recommendation. It is not my role to make a debt recommendation. My role, within the report was to set out my advice, and councillors have a responsibility to consider my advice. As part of my advice, I suggested an alternative that may actually better place the authority pressures into the future. Members have responsibility to consider that advice. They do not have to take my advice, because ultimately The level of reserves is a matter for council, not the chief financial officer. So, my assumption is that in coming and agreeing the budget for 22-23, that members reflected on my advice. They chose actually that they recognise it, but they don't support the suggestion that I made, and therefore that didn't lead to any formal recommendations being brought forward to council as part of that process.
Thank you. Now we're in a position where if anybody wants to make a recommendation, this might well be the time to do it.
I'd like to recommend that in respect of the debt level, that is frozen and not increased.
I understand we should take a vote. So do we have a seconder? Okay, Councillor Dedman. All those in favour of the recommendation?
So can I just ask Councillor Cox, when you say freezing the debt level, what amount are you talking about?
The current debt level has been increased from 457 million to 800 plus million already, and what is now being asked is for that debt level to go from 800 and whatever 50 million to 1.3 million. In my opinion, at these times, that is too much and too risky, particularly in the light of increasing interest. And therefore, I think, we need to freeze it at the moment, and the council should work within its unless there is some some scheme that comes up that which we all agree on. At the moment, I haven't seen that.
The leader of the council wants to come back before we take that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. And just what would be really helpful, committee may well or not decide to take this advice, but where we have heard quite clearly from both the Director of Finance, where only debt going forward will be spent on housing or regeneration schemes, perhaps the recommendation could actually say those housing schemes or those regeneration schemes that they don't want to spend money on. I think that'd be really helpful, because we're only talking about, and I'll just say again, so this isn't a target effective, this is a cap, this is headroom. So if and Councillor Cox is quite right, we should debate and discuss anything that comes forward and then agree as a majority of the council if we want to take these schemes forward. It is only at that point that any of this debt will be that debt headroom will be used. So to be clear, it's only for housing and regeneration, and if the committee would like to, in putting imposing a cap, would like to suggest the housing and regeneration schemes they would like to stop investing in, that'd be really helpful, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Right, so you're happy to go ahead for the vote? All those in favour? 1, 2, 3. All in favour? And those against? 3, 4, 5, 6. Five in favour and 4. Sorry, 4 in favour and 5 against. Thank you. Does anybody have any further recommendations? Okay. Well, in that case,
Chairman,
yes.
Sorry, Chairman, I would have had a similar recommendation, but it would have been couched in different terms if I could say it, and then at least I've got it off my piece of paper. So my recommendation was that this committee, or whatever we are at the moment, we're not a board anymore, has concerns on the level of borrowing, concerns on the sustainability of the plans, and concerns on using all these complex transactions for our budget.
Do you have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Cox. Okay, all those in favour?
Ask if those votes will be noted, because
yes, by all
I really
means.
like this stuff.
Just for transparency, so that was 4 in favour of both motions and 5 against. Councillor Hedges came in during the debate, so we have.
I do
That's
apologise. I'm really sorry.
That's quite all right. I just want to make it clear for transparency purposes, and I will report them in the minutes.
Thank you.
I think it would become obvious.
Committee, I think we should now move on to the medium-term financial plan. And who wants to kick off? Is that you, Councillor Mellor?
Yes, I will. Oh, sorry. It's just to be clear, it's the outturn report we're now moving to. We've just discussed that. Yeah, very happy to chair. I think we probably have a strong debate on this again. It would appear, which I welcome. So I'll be brief in my introduction. I've talked about some of this before, effectively in the previous papers. It directly connects to the MTFP. So chair, really positive, unarguably positive outturn. So we had significant pressure during last year. At certain points, we've had, in terms of, COVID pressure on our services and threats to some of our income levels. So north of £10 million at certain points. At the Q3 point, which was the last point we looked at these numbers, we were projecting, let me just get the number exactly right. What was it? Around about £3 million, just over £3 million of surplus. We've now managed to increase that to £6.8 million. We've got in revenue outturn on paragraph 4. We've got that detailed variance for members who will be able to see that. And again, significant detail throughout the paper on a service by how that is, how that sum's been arrived at. What it also means is we've, some of the one-off resources we were able to use in last year's budget, we haven't had to use, which means we can then they now become available to us to use in the 23-24 budget. So just to say, because of that good performance, and I think it totals about £15 million surplus in those two parts there. We're in a significantly better financial position than we'd anticipated being in terms of outturn. And that is, again, I do believe it's fair to say, as in terms of the record of delivery, we have delivered the one budget this administration has put forward. Any of our assumptions we've delivered to. So we have a proof of our prudence and a proof of our delivery. So which I'm really proud of. Can I just, in doing so, can I just take a moment to commend. Again, and I believe we say this really regularly, but the times we're living in have been, unbelievable and incredibly intense. So the work that has gone into delivering that surplus and managing with the level of prudence we have done is in no part, is in large part due to the fantastic finance team we have got, led by Adam Richards. Nicola Webb has prepared this report in some detail as well, and I'd just like to take the moment to thank those officers for supporting us really diligently through this. And in that context, it's been amazing how much the government have given grants out to people, but the amount, and Adam referenced it earlier in the council tax grant, but the amount of extra work that has caused Adam's team has been unbelievable, and it's been genuinely quite heroic how quickly that those officers have got money to businesses or to people. So it would be certainly appreciated by me, and I'm sure by Adam, that if this committee could put on record some thanks, absolutely not towards the administration, but to Adam and his team, who have done incredible work in the last 24 months. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Are there any? Yes, Councillor Cox.
It's not so much a question as to unusually agree wholeheartedly with the leader. So I just wanted to cherish that moment and say that I completely agree that the work that the finance team and Adam Richards has done is heroic, and I think you should thank him for that.
Yes, indeed.
I'm just going to say, if that is a recommendation, I can second that.
Yes, I think we'd all probably go along with that. Thank you. Are there any questions? Oh, sorry, I didn't see it on the screen. Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. The actual report, paragraph 67 on page 44, covers the provision for £5.45 million in respect of the BDC. I'm just trying to understand what that provision really means. My understanding of provision in the accounts is normally to cover for some expense that is probably not recoverable and is likely to be a loss. So I'm really trying to understand why this should be when the planning consent has been granted for the Winter Gardens development. The work was started just before Christmas. We've now seen it halted, and we've been told this is because there's some new consideration about changing the scheme completely. But we're also informed that it's because of a lack of third-party financing coming through. So I'm is the bottom line here that the BDC is going to make a loss of £10 million because this development will go ahead? It's not going to go ahead. What really is the story here? Because at the moment, I really don't understand what's going on.
Councillor Mellor.
Yeah, thank you. It's an entirely valid question, and if I do my best to answer it, Councillor Bartlett, and I'm sure Adam can come in. So my understanding is investment into schemes like the BDC, or when we have a single option on a scheme, we are able to capitalise to that scheme. So rather than it being revenue money we're spending on it, it's capital money. So BDC has expended, has spent, a significant amount of money. It must be 10 million because that's what we're providing for half of that on this scheme. If we then go forward with the scheme, I'm going to come back and spend a little bit of time on the third party funding. But if we ultimately decide to do that, then that entire £10 million can still remain capitalised against the scheme. So ultimately, if we carry ahead with that scheme, but we should only really capitalise stuff when we've got a single option. What we've asked Future Places to do is to just pause effectively, and BDC to pause the scheme so Future Places can look at that whole area in the round and say, is the right ultimate, if things are a long time built, so rather than just rush ahead and build something that's got planning permission, which we're obviously keen to do, because we want to get cranes in the sky and get things built, we think it's the right decision to just pause, to look at that, look at the big site, look at the ARC we're talking about, look at all of those sort of regeneration schemes in Bournemouth, and try and work out what is the best use of that site. If ultimately it is to go ahead with the scheme as is, great. We would have been overly prudent, and there would not be a loss effectively there. If we, depending on what comes forward, and make a different decision to proceed on the consented scheme, then we'll do an analysis, and certain amounts of that money may be able to be attributable, capital to a new scheme. But what we've done is taken the prudent, sensible, reasonable, whatever word you want to do, view, is while we're pausing on it, let's make a provision. So let's just say if we carried on with the scheme as is, or if we if we were effectively too prudent to provide that, we'd be talking about a 20 million positive surplus, and not a 15 million pounds. So yeah, and I mentioned I'd come back onto the third party piece. I think, and I'm more than happy to look into this for you, but I think that's actually a little bit of a red herring. Is there third party finance for this scheme or not? I think the point I would say here is we are not in a position to proceed with this scheme until we've heard back from Future Places. So that is the reason it's not going ahead at the moment, and that is the reason we've provided for it. There is significant ability for third-party finance, across a myriad of schemes. We're seeing, a lot of third-party funders come in and get cranes in the sky and invest in businesses and regeneration schemes. So I don't think that's the issue. I think we need clarity on what we're going to do there, and hopefully the point about capitalising single options is of some use. Before I just close, could I just check in with with Adam Richards? This is a detailed piece around there, and I wouldn't want to be in any way misleading you, Councillor Bartlett. So perhaps I'll now just defer to Adam, through you, Chair, if I may, to just see if Adam Richards would like to say anything else.
Yes, Mr. Richards.
No, Chair. I think what the Leader of the Council's outlined is a fair assessment of the position the Council finds itself in.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Bartlett?
Yeah, I could just come back. I mean, clearly, this scheme has been in the offing since 2015, and so it's not a question of rushing to do the development. It's many years on, and deeply frustrating with so much effort having gone into it and so much expense. But I guess what I'm really worried about is that, and I haven't seen the BDC's accounts, so I don't know how much money they've got in there to cover any potential losses that they've got. But is this the bottom line on potential losses for the BDC for the Winter Garden scheme? Because if there's already money in the BDC, maybe it's covering even a bigger loss on this development than what we understand it's likely to be. So and also I'm concerned about the ongoing costs of any loan notes, etc., that may be accrued. Or is this write down going to take into account all of the losses, or is there still more to come over a longer period? Because I know there's very complex financial arrangements between the BDC and the council, and there is a sort of a pecking order in terms of interest which will become durable on investments made by, as it was, Morgan Sindall, and whether that would be ongoing and how long that would be ongoing for, I don't know. But it just concerns me that this is just the start of it, and there could be a lot more behind this issue than we really know about.
Councillor Mellor, did you want to come back?
Thank you. And again, really good questions. I just say I do appreciate this as Winter Gardens has been something, particularly Bournemouth councillors will have been discussing for a significant amount of time. I would just try and ask you and council to take some confidence in the fact that we are determined to get it right. We are determined to make the right decisions, and we're determined to make take new advice in terms of future places. And we do not want to just build buildings on car parks. We want to create one of the best places to be in the world, and we are determined to get it right. Councillor Bartlett, I've been accused or complimented, whichever way you put it, on being bold and trying to come forward at pace and scale. So if we're saying with that desperation for pace and scale, we're actually going to pause and make sure we get this right. I'd hope you have some that gives you some comfort. In terms of quite a lot of questions on BDC, but if I can just I think I've answered all of them. Is this the bottom line in terms of the Winter Gardens? Yes, I believe it is. What will happen in terms of the BDC's accounts? Do they have the ability to fund this investment loss if they need to? Well, yes, because we provided £5 million is currently sat in our accounts, which we would have available to fund it, and £5 million has also been provided from the Muse, I presume it would be, account. So that cash is there. It's not sitting in BDC, but it's sitting here, and we provided for it. So we've got it safe. Also where I think you were concerned about what is there a deeper situation in terms of BDC? Well, my understanding, perfectly happy to be on record about that, is that there isn't. So I'm well aware we make there are some profits on certain schemes that are coming forward. They will be offset. We're expecting those to be offset against any losses. So we're expecting profits to be, so that would effectively reduce. Whether it wouldn't technically reduce our provision, but that money would be made available back to us in terms of the MTFP. So I totally get your questions. And I think they're really valid. I'm more than happy to spend some time, going into a deeper dive in BDC with you or anybody else or this committee should we want to. But I've been as clear as I can. We've been as prudent as we can and should be, and I hope that's transparent enough and helpful.
Could I just come back, Chair, just briefly?
Yeah.
I mean, I think the real concern I've got, I think, is the implications for all the other work that is yet to be done by the BDC, and also those sites that are allocated to future places, because it's a question of confidence. There's huge investment going now into future places on the understanding that they will come forward with schemes that will be viable and can be developed out. But unfortunately, the flagship development for the BDC has come to a grinding halt for various reasons. So, what confidence can we now have that the sites coming forward after the significant investment going into future places, will, what confidence can we have given that, the situation we're in with Winter Gardens? Are we putting more money into future places in order to bring sites forward that ultimately may not be deliverable because, for example, the economic situation we have and the apparent reluctance of third-party finance to come forward? Thank you.
Councillor Miller.
Yeah, I share a different view in terms of third-party finance. That there are billions and billions of pounds, an investment available in regeneration, as long as we're bringing the right schemes under the right financial models forward. BDC and Future Places are different entities. BDC has delivered a number of things really successfully and well, and we've made returns on them. We're setting a higher bar, effectively going forward, about those schemes fitting in with the wider regeneration. It would be unhelpful, I think, to just push on with those until we've got our new Future Places team, who are taking a holistic, whole regional view of development. So we're really up for getting behind BDC and the BDC schemes, and we've very much look forward to developing more of them. We may well be developing the Winter Garden scheme as consented, but we need to, work out with Future Places, and I'm not going to rush it. I'm going to make sure, we allow our Future Places team, some of the best talent, in UK and arguably worldwide regeneration. We're going to make sure we listen to them before we start building.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you.
Councillor Cox.
Thank you. Whilst Councillor Miller's positivity is something to behold, I have to applaud the prudence of Councillor Bartlett. In actual fact, the reason that the BDC have actually taken effectively a £10 million hit or provision is that Muse have decided to take a £5 million, their share of that. They've taken a provision, and therefore it was felt only prudent, for BCP to do the same. So it was Muse clearly don't have the confidence that Councillor Miller have in the ability of Future Places to perform. So that's the reality of it, is that other people have made their decisions of what they decide is prudent, and we've had to follow.
Councillor Allen, I think you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I think there's a slight irony here where, we were moaning about overspend a moment ago, but now I'm going to have a moan about an underspend. So looking at figure 5, which is the capital programme, and I just had a question really around the risks of the TCF. Now, obviously, there was a huge amount budgeted for it. I think we were pretty much hoping to see most of those schemes come to fruition, if not start work, if not be completed. And I know it's very difficult when you've got lots of service areas, and this is a financial paper, but I wanted to find out if there is any update on potentially when that money runs out and if there's any risk of not spending it in time. Thanks.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, and I don't have any problem. We should challenge both. Underspending. We can bill an underspend as really positive, but if it means we've stopped investing in our priorities or not delivering our priorities, then I think we should be challenging it. So I wouldn't have any issue with raising that. Specifically in terms of TCF, and I'm more than happy to, and I will get a more detailed answer to you from our portfolio holder. But as we're aware, that money has been committed. We have a plan to spend it, so that there is no risk that has been made aware to me of us not doing it. This council is committed to Transform and Travel agenda, and look forward to delivering it. So, Councillor Ali, if there was a more specific question that I haven't answered in detail, I'm really happy to take that away and get that. But as far as I'm aware, we're fully committed, and there is no monies at risk, effectively, from Transform and Travel.
Councillor Earl.
Sorry, I wasn't implying there was a risk. It's probably just from my naivety around whether that funding runs out at some point. But that's all right. I'm very happy to speak to portfolio holder directly, just to allay my fears around that. Thank you.
If I could just say, it's absolutely not my understanding that is the case, but I will check that with a portfolio holder and get back to you.
excuse me, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered if someone can explain to me the dedicated schools grant. Because this obviously, I presume, is market led, but have we got plans to bring this down? Because I mean, these are eye-watering sums of money here, and I don't really understand the dedicated schools grant. So I just wondered, as I say, you could explain it to me and plans of bringing the deficit down.
Councillor Drew.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's worth just spending a little bit of time on this because this is a genuine, and I would agree, material risk to this authority, because effectively this is overspend in around the school grant. What we're not able to do is to make revenue provision effectively to pay it off. So it's just an accumulating deficit. So if government gave all councils the ability to effectively put this, I guess a technical term, but sort of off balance sheet. That flexibility runs out. So two things. One, we are working desperately hard to try and bring that investment in those children that need it to a level that is more balanced. And there's a significant programme. We'd be perfectly happy to bring that forward to this committee or whether it be the Children's Committee to look into that work. I think that would be a really useful piece of scrutiny. But what I will say as well, so yes, in answer to your question, so two things. One, it is a big risk and it is a big number. It is eye-watering. Two, there's a significant piece of work that is going on to address that, and we're starting to generate more confidence that we're able to. But three, this is a problem nationally. So the risk to us is if the government effectively turn off the ability to off balance sheet it or don't offset it with investment for us. If they were to do that, we have a large dedicated school DSG deficit. We certainly don't have the largest in the country. A significant number of authorities across the country would have massive difficulty with this. So the government aren't in a position where we're able to turn it off. We've obviously, as a large authority, been making representation. I've been in discussions with the head of the Conservative group on the LGA, who has regular meetings with London on it. I know that in our latest Ofsted visit and work with the DFE advisor, we've been making representations, which he's also been making in his national position to ministers on it. So the government are going to have to come and do something. I think the report does also indicate that some deals have been done with the top, Adam will tell me, percentage of authorities that have effectively the government have intervened with to support as effectively a test case. We're not in that highest benchmark of issue, so we're lower down than that. But it's a material issue, and we need government to come in and provide a long-term solution to it. Perhaps I could hand over to Councillor Adam, to apologise, Adam Richards, to come in with some further detail.
Mr. Richards.
Chair, just because it may help in the sense, we're looking at the outturn report and we're looking at section 77 to 82 that are headed towards dedicated schools grant, and we're looking at the 21-22 outturn position and how the accumulated deficit that we brought forward, started the year at £7.8 million, and at the end of the year it's grown to 20.3, and the leader reflects on things like the high needs recovery group, etc., with regards to trying to take proactive action to try and bring that deficit on an ongoing basis down. But then also it was a matter for discussion and reference in the MTFP report, the report that we've just looked at in section 12. And in section 12, I think that puts it of the other report, it puts it into the context of, what's its impact on the council's overall financial position, and those conversations that the leader referred to with regards to government and what the impact might be if the government don't extend those regulations. So it's one of those that's probably best read, both reports almost at the same time to give you that overall context of what happened in the last financial year and where does that leave us and what's the future look like.
Thank you. Any more questions? No. Okay. Anybody want to make any recommendations?
Sorry, Chairman, it wasn't so much a question as a comment on the so we're on the outturn report, aren't we? I want to make sure, because we've got so many bits of stuff flying about. On adult social care, although they look as though they did very well, I must say, and it isn't a particular question, and it's not to denigrate anybody. The staff are absolutely wonderful, and all the people that we serve are wonderful, but we are not able to give the services that we have been used to giving because of the lack of staffing. And it's a bit churlish to say, well, we only did the savings because we didn't open all the day centres. Well, but that's almost exactly what the situation is, and I thought it should be flagged up. And then the other thing, which I've just noticed, I've made a note here on page 49. Sorry, I'm a bit slow on this machine. 49, where is it? I can't find it again, but it was something about the seafront. The seafront team have made or have not done all the work that they were going to do. And I just want to make the point that, no, they haven't in Christchurch. They've made, I know it's in here, Jem, it's in the report that they have not been able to do all the work that they were set out to do. And I do feel that that also needs flagging up. A lot of these savings, these little savings that we've got here and there, are because things have not been done rather than we've done them in a different way. We just haven't done them.
Councillor Mellor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Couple of points on that, if I may. Councillor Dedman said in relation to adult social care, we've not done what we normally do. Effectively, you know, that's not correct. In my understanding, because you know, if we said we've actually done a significant amount more. So over the 2 years of this administration, we put, you know, in round numbers, around about £25 million of extra investment into adult social care, certainly north of £20 million. So there's significantly more money and investment going into adult social care than has ever been the case before. It's the same actually with Seafront. Millions of pounds, you know, of extra, you know, we're putting in terms of our summer response, and you know, I think the number we've moved forward in this budget to carry forward with is £1.5 million on specifically on Seafront, which is more, you know, is sand being moved off of a prom, you know, across the conurbation. More of our Seafront rangers or officers, forget their terminology, supporting there. So there's significantly more money going to adult social care, significantly more money going to Seafront, and there is also significantly more money is going into Christchurch. We just see the stuff that we've been doing in and around, you know, extra street cleaning and new dedicated teams in street cleaning in Christchurch. So I just, you know, Councillor Dedman was absolutely right. Some areas, you know, haven't spent to their full allocations, but nearly across the board, it's fair to say that there is significantly more investment going in across the conurbation.
Councillor Dedman.
Chairman, I just must say that I have read this report very carefully. I'm not going to read out the whole of the thing, but the leader is making a mistake when he says that no services have been cut.
Does anybody have a recommendation they wish to make? Okay, so we'll move on then. Item 8. Well, the next meeting is going to be a special meeting to discuss beach huts. We'll have a date for that shortly. It will be in July. And the meeting after that, the Vice Chair and I are going to get together and work a plan for the next 3 meetings. So we should be able to bring that to you at the beach hut meeting. The date of the next meeting. Sorry, did you want to speak?
No, I just wanted to make a request, which is that shortly before the previous ONS board ceased to exist, there was quite a significant work plan. And I've been through the list of the current work plans for the 2 new committees that have replaced it. And there is quite a few items which don't appear on either one. So when yourself and the Vice Chairman go through that process, will you double check on the previous list that everything on that previous item goes to one of the 2 boards? Yeah, I can do. Yeah, I'll send them to you. There's 3 or 4. Yeah, thank you.
That'd be very helpful. Thank you. So we've got meeting dates for the next 3 meetings actually. 17th of October at 6 p.m. The 5th of December at 6 p.m. and the 30th of January at 6 p.m. So they're the 3 meetings we would have. Yes, Councillor Devon.
Yes, I'm sorry, Chairman, you wouldn't expect me to miss out this potential transfer of play sites and other BCP assets to Christchurch Town Council. Is that coming up before the actual Cabinet meeting? Because it's been pushed forward. I don't know when it's coming to Cabinet now. I'm sure our clerk will be able to tell me. But I think October's a bit late.
Can we come back to you on that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
So those are the 3 meeting dates for your diary. If there's nothing else from anybody, I'd like to close the meeting at 8:01. Thank you.